The transportation and logistics industry has its own set of challenges. In the hot seat, industry thought leaders take on M&A and what's driving the future of transportation and logistics. Are you ready for the hot seat?
Welcome to In the Hot Seat with the Tenney Group. I'm Spencer Tenney. It's good to be with you. My next guest, you know his hot legal opinions. You probably also recognize his unforgettable sense of style. With me is the speaker, the attorney, self-proclaimed armchair attorney, and adjunct professor at Michigan State University, Matthew Leffler. Welcome to the hot seat.
Thank you for having me, Spencer. This is a long time coming, so I'm glad we're finally able to coordinate our very busy schedules together.
Well, I as we talked about offline, my audience has been saying, what's the deal? When is this happening? And finally, we are able to accommodate them. But for those who are not familiar with you yet, why don't you just take 30 seconds and introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, I appreciate that. So I'm a third-generation guy in the transportation logistics business. My grandfather had a trucking company. My father worked at Roadway. I had the chance to try to escape the industry, knowing that maybe it was possible, but unfortunately it was not. So I've been a lawyer now in the transportation industry for the better part of 15 years. I do a lot of writing for companies like FreightWaves and JOC. I go around speaking about things. And to your point, I do teach law, supply chain law, to second and third-year law students. So I dabble in a whole lot of things, and it's something really fun I get to do.
That's right. And my understanding is that Jason Miller works for you. And
That's right. So Jason Miller is an endowed and tenured professor at the Eli Broad College of Business, one of the best in the world. And I am an adjunct law professor at the college. So yes, I would say we are colleagues. And I do think there's a dotted line he reports to me.
Well, we'll see how this goes. We might get him on the show next. We'll see. We'll see who the real boss is here pretty quick.
I'll put in a good word for you.
That's right. So, I think the first time that we met officially, I think we were doing an interview on FreightWaves. I think we were both asked to comment something on the Forward Air,
yes,
and the Omni deal. And then,
absolutely,
and since then, I feel like you're everywhere. You're everywhere I go. And then
it's incredible. So that is like, for your listeners, this is the most interesting merger in transportation in the last couple of decades. You're talking a publicly traded, trucking company, Forward Air, and a private equity-backed freight forwarder, Omni Logistics, which had a merger that was going to happen, then it wasn't going to happen, then it was going to happen, then it did happen. And we see this incredible combination of these two incredibly powerful organizations. And so that's how we got to first kind of connect on that. It's one of these things I still go back to. I still read about it because it's still kind of percolating and the integration is ongoing, but it was fantastically interesting to watch.
Well, speaking of interesting things to watch, there's a few legal developments, regulatory developments within our space. So what has you kind of fascinated with what's going on right now, and what has you dialed in?
Yeah, the two biggest cases that are in front of the U.S. Supreme Court are supply chain related. One of them being the VOS selections case. This is the reciprocal tariffs that were put at earlier this year on the Liberation Day. And what we now have is this case is in front of the Supreme Court of the United States. Oral arguments are happening in November. So it's whenever this gets released, people will get to know how the justices kind of talked about this. But this is by far the most interesting case is in my life, and probably many lives of the listeners here. And we will find out, can IEEPA, which is the International Economic Emergency Powers Act of 1977, can that be used to declare an emergency and then associate tariffs across a broad category of items? And Trump has lost twice now at the Court of International Trade. He lost at the federal appellate court. He lost. So the question now before SCOTUS is, will he be successful or will he fail? So that's one incredibly interesting case. The other one is broker liability. We've been talking about F4A preemption for a minute, and now we actually have a Supreme Court case. It's a C.H. Robinson case from the Seventh Circuit in front of SCOTUS, and we will find out, can brokers be held liable for the negligence of a motor carrier? And that's another question that has been percolating for a long time, and now we're going to finally get some clarity.
So let's back up on the VOS here, because there's a partial precedent for this, but some of this is completely unknown territory. We have not faced something like this in the way that these tariffs were activated. So let's just say that the Trump administration is unsuccessful at Supreme Court level. What remedies could be available to folks who have been having to pay these tariffs?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think if they end up being found to be invalid, which it's hard to say if that'll happen or not. But if they were, I suspect that businesses would get maybe tax credits. Importers may get tax credits for having paid these fees. Because for everyone who's watching or listening, the importer pays the tariff. It's not the exporter from other country. It's the person who brings it in the country. They pay for the tariff. For individual consumers, I don't think you get any relief. I think you just pay that bill and that's the end of it. But there might be a question about like whether a big fund gets allocated and some people get paid back some amount. But unwinding those tariffs is not going to be the big challenge. I think it'll be interesting to happen. We have been able to navigate things like this, but I don't think that'll be the big issue. The bigger issue is if they are upheld. And this is the part that I think a lot of people kind of lose sight of. The use of IEPA, and I'm going to get technical for a moment, is the president declares an emergency. It can be whatever they want, fentanyl, trade deficits, illegal immigration, whatever the emergency is. The only way to stop the emergency is if Congress realistically gets 2/3 of both the House and the Senate to say there's no emergency. In this political environment, you will never have 2/3 of anybody doing anything. And so these emergencies stick around. And the average emergency lasts 10 years in the United States. So this idea that this is just a one-off, you will see any future president, in my opinion, day one, it's an emergency, and they'll do whatever they want to do. And we talk about this at IANA. You can imagine someone who has the political difference of Trump and says, I think that climate change is an emergency. And because it's an emergency, any internal combustion engine or any component that goes to an internal combustion engine needs a 5,000% tariff. How would you stop that? You couldn't. You couldn't stop it. That's why the VOS elections case has got the U.S. Chamber of Commerce interested, the ATA interested. They are all very, very curious about where this thing lands, and it's anybody's guess where it'll go.
So, Armchair Attorney, where do you think it lands?
I am going to put my best professorial hat on and say if the justices follow the Constitution, they are invalidated. There is nothing in that IEPA statute that says Congress has the power to give up the tariff capabilities. And there's nothing in IEPA itself that says tariffs are even included. And I think that's the outcome you'd want. We don't want to live in a government that is done by emergency. So in my opinion, I could see a path where 5-4 Trump loses. I could see Roberts or Amy Coney Barrett jumping on the side of the more liberal justices. If I'm putting on my pure politician kind of hat, Trump wins. And Trump wins 6-3. And these tariffs become, in place forever. And as a country, you see this growth in a more powerful executive branch. It is a very powerful executive branch. Whether you're Democratic or or conservative, doesn't matter. It's a very powerful branch. And this emergency power will be uniquely interesting in the future of our politics. So my hope is it's invalidated, but my gut tells me they are going to stick around.
So keeping that professorial hat on, I'm curious, and at all levels of law. Obviously, this is at Supreme Court level. But some of this, you're trying to follow the Constitution, but some of this, I'm learning how much of this is influenced by fear of precedent of what this creates. Kind of what you talked about, as far as like this potentially opens up. Even if you agreed with what President Trump, you could be very concerned about the precedent that it creates.
Oh, absolutely.
Moving forward. So to what degree does that influence what could happen at the Supreme Court's decision?
I mean, the institutional powers are really important to understand. And I'm going to jump on a soapbox as we have a chance to talk about this. But if you look at people in the House or the Senate, they identify party first, branch second. So I'm a Democrat from the House. I'm a conservative in the Senate. They don't view the institution as their primary function. They view their party. And that is why the Democrats and the Republicans have given up so much power to the executive branch, basically saying, I will follow whatever my party says. And it's this erosion within these other institutions. And I think if we look at institutions, we have 3 branches of government. It's a 3-legged stool: executive, legislative, judicial. Each one checks and balances the other. But if you have one that is too powerful, and this is the theory they call the unitary executive, and the unitary executive is the only branch that matters is the executive. Everything else is transitory. If you view it that way, then you live in a world where it's not what the founders intended. My hope is that SCOTUS will look very hard at what the outcome is and the way you got to the outcome. Because if you're a Republican and you're like, I love the tariffs, they're amazing, they're so wonderful. The ends can't justify the means, because if you're living by emergencies, and the only way you're going to govern anything is through emergency powers. And this is a Democrat and a conservative problem. So my hope is they do not allow these to stand, because I know the world that comes after, where they say, okay, well, I can't pass this through the Congress, but I can declare an emergency, and every single thing that I don't like, I'm going to put a giant tariff on it, and there's no way to stop me. It's an interesting trend that I would love to see reversed, but man, I'm a cynical guy sometimes, and I just don't know if that's possible.
So did our audience just kind of get a preview of what your MTSU classroom looks like? Is this kind of just a little taste of it?
My job is to help people understand, legal and otherwise, that this is a $1 trillion a year domestic industry, safely delivering freight on time and undamaged, never goes out of style. And so I want people to know the different avenues that they can get into the business. And from our perspective right now, these tariffs are fascinating, because we have watched something that has never happened before. It is unprecedented to do this, but unprecedented times are interesting times, and it's a blessing and a curse to live in interesting times.
I think that's an understatement there, sir. Let's talk about the broker transparency, which is always a hot topic.
Yeah.
So what is a workable version of transparency? In your opinion, sir? I want just map it out for us.
Transparency is irrelevant. I mean, I'm a very different opinion of this. So the FMCSA is the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, $1 billion a year budget. And what they do is they regulate over 500,000 motor carriers, 25,000 brokers, 4,000 interstate bus companies, millions of CDL holders. And this question has been coming up again and again. When should motor carriers know how much money the broker was paid by the shipper? That is what broker transparency boils down to. To look at the issue the right way, in my opinion, you have to go back and say, where did this come from? Because the FMCSA 371.3, there's a history of this code. In the old days, brokers that existed were helping motor carriers find backhauls. They would identify a shipper. They would say, here's the carrier's going to do this. The shipper would then pay the motor carrier. And the broker would be like, hey, dude, how much money were you paid? And the motor carrier would say, I don't have to tell you. I'll give you, here's $1,000. Like, the broker transparency originally was brokers trying to find out how much money the shipper paid the motor carrier. It's evolved. Our industry is different than that now. These days, it's two transactions. It's the shipper with the broker and the broker with the motor carrier. So we have this regulation on the books, and the regulation says you need to disclose your broker transaction documents if they're requested. And that's it. What we see brokers do today is they make the motor carrier waive that right. Every motor carrier waives the right to view those records. And now you have the FMCSA coming out with some rules. They proposed some earlier this year, and that was 48 hours in electronic format. So if you requested it, you have 2 days, here's your records. And that was pulled back. So the FMCSA is going to do another rulemaking in May of next year. And then you have the pink cheetah lawsuit against TQL. So there's ways that people are trying to challenge the waiver of the document. Can I waive the right to the broker transaction? And that's an interesting question. But for me, the national out of service rate for commercial vehicles is 20%, 22% or so. The FMCSA has other things to worry about than how much money a shipper paid a broker. If you want to know those records, fine. But why in the world would the FMCSA, the safety organization, care at all what private corporations do with their transactions? If you're a motor carrier and you want to know how much you got paid, the broker got paid, and they don't want to give it to you, don't work with that broker again. Like, you can do that. Like, there's a freedom in this. So I'm very animated about broker transparency.
I've never known you to be animated, sir. About anything, much less your wardrobe. And so
I love it, man.
It's funny that you bring it up. Like, when you put it in that context, you kind of lay it out like that. You're like, Lordy mercy. Like, this is kind of free market capitalism. Like, this is like what, like this is one thing that actually works. Like if you don't like it, just go use somebody else. That's
100%.
Pretty easy.
If you're worried about how much profit margin Amazon makes on that towel rack that you bought, like you can shop at other places. You don't have to buy from Amazon, and you don't have to get disclosure. Hey, Amazon, how much did you pay for that? I want to know. Like that's crazy. And that's why this movement of broker transparency is, I think, misplaced. We worry about other things that we ought not to. Non-domiciled CDLs, English language proficiency, those are also interesting topics. But for me, it's about insurance and vehicle maintenance and whether brokers are liable when motor carriers have accidents. Like these are really big issues
I think
that are far more prevalent
than the latter. So let me transition here. When you opened up, you talked about being a third generation guy, which a lot of people know that I'm a second gen Tenney Group. They don't know that I'm a third gen trucking guy. My grandfather drove a beer truck, Dallas, Texas, way back in the day.
There you go.
And like you, I tried to avoid this space at all costs, but it does have a way of sucking you in for life. And I wouldn't have it any other way. One thing that I've always been interested about, and I've never really talked to you about it, is your fascination with trailers. And so what is that? What is the passion? Why is it so significant? And, where do you see the value in that in our industry?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. So the most common asset we have in supply chain is the trailer. And I count chassis and containers as part of that. But trailers, generally, there's about 5 million of them in the U.S. And about a third of them have some sort of tracking on them. So you can tell where it is or if the doors are open, but a lot of them are disconnected. All of the innovation that is promised in our supply chain is predicated on well-maintained connected trailers. You don't get to have an autonomous truck without having a trailer that can connect with that truck and communicate tire pressure monitoring and all the other things you care about. Why I really loved trailers initially was because in 1991, my father started a business, and his business was about following this trend of outsourcing fleet services. And he named the company Outsource Fleet Services. And his first customer, Spencer's first customer, was a little company called Roadway Package Systems, RPS. And people who are in the business, they go, Roadway Package Systems, what was that? It was Roadway's answer to UPS. And they had an idea. We can compete in parcel, but we don't need all the labor. We don't need to have the drivers and the trucks and the mechanics. What we'll own is trailers and sorting centers. And RPS became Caliber, and Caliber became FedEx Ground. And what did Ground care about, 30, 40 years ago? It's trailers. So if you look back and say, who are the companies that own a lot of trailers? Well, there's Extra Lease, owned by Berkshire Hathaway. I get to this because everything that you own came on a truck inside of a trailer. They were all in a trailer, whether that was a chassis or a container across the oceans, or if it was in the trailer that brings it to your distribution center or, eventually to your house at some level. So I love trailers. And I think the innovation that we hope to see in this industry is around these boxes. So I love trailers. They provided food for my family, literally in every context. My father fixed the trailers for FedEx for 25 years. So I obsess about trailers. I don't discriminate. I love reefers. I love dry vans. I love flatbeds. I love dump trailers. I love them all. But I do have a sweet spot for those 53-foot with swing doors. Give me some sheet and post. I like sheet and post. Composite panels are fine. They just take longer to replace.
I love it. And I love the history lesson as well. So let me kind of shift over. You and I, we've crossed paths quite a bit on the panel circuits all around the country within this space. I'm sure that you kind of experience what I experienced. There's always some, you're always learning. I think that's one of the benefits. You get to go speak at this, but like as part of being on the stage, you get to learn a lot.
Absolutely.
From other folks. And so I'm curious, last 90, 120 days is kind of being conference season. What's an industry voice that you've heard or as part of a panel, maybe interviewing at IANA or whatnot, that you were like, wow, this is a voice or a mind that people need to pay attention to in our space?
I mean, I think a great example is Ann Milgram. So she spoke at IANA, and Ann used to run the DEA, and she's kind of bringing her experience in running a big enforcement agency into transportation and logistics. If I find her speaking anywhere, like I'm going to be there if best I can to watch it. I love anybody who has a passion for this business. Like there's a lot of people who go on panels and they're like, let me explain to you why you should buy services from me or buy this product from me. And I get that. Like that, there's a reason people do the speaking stuff. But I love people that have the energy to educate and entertain. I want to learn. I want to network, obviously, but I want to make sure that like the industry is bringing in people that have different perspectives and ultimately want to drive value for the business. I love Ryan Joyce. I love how you hear him speak from Genlogs. Ken Adamo from DAT. I have a long list here, Spencer. We could take the rest of the program, like listing off great people that everyone should follow and listen to.
Yeah.
The thing I will also mention is the conferences are useful, but these people, they're still awesome even outside of these conferences. So a lot of times it's like, who should I be following? Who should I be learning from? And they get the social media piece afterwards. That's what I really love is these people continue to make great stuff. And it's like, I want to learn as much as I can from them.
I love that. So, hot topic across all industry right now, AI, automation. What are you seeing as far as some of these developments? A lot of excitement. What do you think that could go wrong from a legal standpoint? I mean, for instance, automated trucks. There's a host of different things to consider here. But what are the legal implications that we should all be mindful of as some of these things? Maybe 5 years ago sounded like sci-fi, but they're really, some of it's here and the rest of it's going to be here very, very soon. So what are the legal implications that we need to be mindful of, specifically around liability as we start having autonomous trucks?
Yeah, I think what we live in right now is a new era is beginning. So for our grandparents' generation, or maybe your father's generation, it was the containerization. It was the use of a uniform system to move freight across the oceans. And that was a major change. And there were unions like the longshoremen who fought it tooth and nail, but eventually they couldn't stop it. It was too profound and too cost effective and too safe to not do containerization. Then we saw deregulation in the 80s and 90s. That fundamentally changed the industry from a heavily asset-based unionized workforce to a deregulated explosion of small owners and the small operators. What we see now is the new age of automation. And the age of automation is something where you can look at it and say, well, what used to offshore, you can now automate. You can take something that was done with a human and make it done with a robot or something safety technology. As we look at autonomous trucks, and this is an inevitability. The question is not if, it's a question of when. And what we know are autonomous trucks are running today. They're running between Houston and Dallas. They're doing intrastate. What we will see in the next, I would say, 2 to 3 years is the FMCSA putting out proposed rules on level 4, which is remote operators, level 5, remote assistance. And this is when we can participate. This is when we can say, here's our concerns. And there are many concerns. One of the big concerns I have is our general self-certification process. We self-certify truck driving schools. We self-certify ELDs. And so the industry doesn't really have to worry as much about the regulator. And if you build technology and there's no way to ensure its safety, what would stop a hostile foreign actor from taking control of these things? These are really big questions that really need answers, and we don't really have a good understanding yet. So my big look as it comes down this pathway is you can't stop it. The trends and forces of history do not require your consent. They will happen regardless of your position. You have to participate when the rulemaking process begins, and you have to be aware of what the dangers are. From a liability perspective, man, I love robots. I do. They're safer than humans. And if we use my analogy of the national out of service rate, which is, again, 22%, you're never going to have that with an autonomous truck. An autonomous truck cannot have a 20% failure rate. It's impossible. Like, they would never survive in any environment. These things will have to be better maintained than the trucks and trailers on our roads today. They will likely carry significantly more liability insurance. We don't carry a ton in the industry now. So I think that pathway makes a lot more sense. If you can prove safety, you will prove cost effectiveness, and you will see a portion of over-the-road freight move to autonomous trucks, whether they're done like platooning, like one human being and a couple robots behind it, or pure robots. But I, for one, welcome our robot overlords. I will absolutely betray the humans at the first opportunity.
Well, what's interesting, you have a whole generation of distracted drivers coming up. I think that culturally we're warming up to the realities that perhaps these robots will be safer than ourselves on the road. What's interesting, I was interviewing Stas over at the one of the transportation journals. This is at IANA, and we were talking about fraud. And one of the things that we were talking about specifically with AI was, like a lot of folks, like they're overwhelmed. They haven't really been able to benefit from it because they don't know how to best leverage the capabilities. But what's not true, or I guess on the opposite side of that, bad actors know precisely how to use AI right now.
Right.
For the purposes of fraud. And so to me, kind of back to the legal question of that, and all of the everything that's coming with fraud in this space, and I mean, what do you see happening here? Because it does seem that we could see things get a lot worse before they get better from an escalation of fraud due to AI, before some of the other enhancements come along where operators can actually really create some profound impacts for the positive.
Yeah, it's a great question, because I think we're starting to realize this problem is not just opportunistic threat. Now it's very clear this is organized criminal cartels, transnational organizations, and we don't have really good ability internally in the United States to collaborate with various law enforcement agencies. So it's a local issue, maybe it's a state issue, maybe it's a federal FBI gets involved. It's a lot of whose job is it to worry about this. Yeah. And now the problem has gotten so big that it's not just the industry can say, well, at least we keep the rates cheap and we have a lot of capacity, so it doesn't really matter. We can absorb this level of fraud and theft. But now we see movement. So there's the Combating Organized Retail Crime Act, CORCA is what it's called. That's a bill in Congress now that would create an agency or a group within the Department of Homeland Security that would focus on this issue and have, collaboration among different actors. But I do think, we've outsourced a lot. We've offshored a lot. And all these people across the world now know exactly how our supply chain functions. And you have technology now where you can spoof ELDs and you can pretend to be something you're not. And it goes back to my initial point on deregulation and ELDs generally. There's about 1,000 ELDs that are self-certified in this country, and over about 250 have been revoked. So it's on average about 3 to 4 per month get revoked in this country. And we go what? That's a surprising number. Why don't we talk about that? Well, we do, but only a few people care. So we now see that this level of laissez-faire creates opportunities. And the opportunities for people to come in and steal stuff that we would like to have ourselves. And so I'm excited to see the collaboration. To your point, does it get worse? Of course it does. Of course it does. These guys and gals are working harder to defraud us than we are to stop them. This is a full-time job for probably thousands of people across the world. And so it's that we have to understand we're not fighting with a local gang guy. We're fighting with organized criminal cartels that a private business like a Genlogs or a Highway, they might help to an extent, but they can't fight transnational criminal organizations. They're just not capable. So we need the federal government to get more involved. And I think we see the path moving in that direction, though the government remains shut down. So, Spencer, I don't know how this plays out.
Well, speaking of how it plays out, as armchair attorney, let's just say that you're going to put our industry on trial here. What would be the crime right now that you would want to prosecute of the freight industry right now? What are we not doing right, or what do you see a problem with that you would fix?
I mean, it is very clear to me. We care more about people being able to speak English than we do about tire tread depth. And I'm going to be very clear. Hope Trans is a big case we heard about not too long ago. Catastrophic injuries, a bunch of people dead. Their out of service rate for their equipment was 35%, Spencer. 35%. 35% of the time that they were inspected, they were told that truck doesn't move until you fix it. And that's not an aberration. This is the way our industry is built. So if I was going to say what I think is wrong with the industry, we are poorly maintained. We are poorly maintained. 1 in 5 is unsafe at any speed. We are underinsured. When the number of general liability insurance for our industry is $750,000, that was established in the 1980s. If you adjusted that for inflation, it'd be $3 or $4 million. Most small motor carriers do not carry anywhere near that level of insurance. So if I was going to say, what's wrong with our supply chain? We are poorly maintained, underinsured, and underenforced. We can talk about out of service for for English language proficiency, but unless you boost the enforcement resources at the state and federal level, you can't expect any different outcome. You can't expect anything different from happening. And so we need better enforcement, higher standards, and higher barriers to enter. And what that would mean for the American consumer is things cost more. And do people really have the ability to pay more for the stuff they're already spending way too much money on? So it's an interesting question. I think I know how you fix it, but I don't think there's the political will to actually want to change how the system operates. I just don't think that's there.
Well, give us just a little flavor of that. What would be just a hint of your solution there?
My initial idea would be to increase the general liability insurance from $750,000 to probably $2 million. And you would lose a ton of capacity. A lot of people simply could not afford that level of insurance. And that is not crazy a number to have. Like Werner and the big guys, they self-insure for 10 million and they have these giant umbrella policies that go hundreds of millions. But small motor carriers would have to pay more for their insurance. You'd lose a lot of capacity. I think you have to increase a truck driving school's time to become a truck driver. So a lot of the questions we see today are people who are not qualified to operate a commercial vehicle. It takes 160 hours a month, 1 month, to learn how to drive an 80,000-pound machine. You're not trained how to drive at night. You're not trained how to drive in the mountains. You're not trained how to drive in bad weather. You are trained to do a drive-in going back and forth and parking it, and then you're off to the races. I think you need better enforcement at the federal and state level, double the enforcement records. International road checks should be every single week. It should not be just 3 days that happen months in advance when people know when it's happening. So those are like the fixes I would do. That is why I am highly unpopular in every group that I work with, because I really do want to fundamentally change it. If we think this is good enough, I disagree. I think it needs a lot more work, but it takes a lot of patience and a lot of making enemies.
Well, to that point, we had Jack Porter on our podcast a couple of weeks ago, the trucking advocate, and he talked a little bit about some of his ideas about maybe having why not, and he was a little bit hyperbole, but somewhat not, like, hey, why don't, instead of $300 for a CDL, why don't make it $30,000? Like it's like a real barrier to entry. But also he hammered pretty home, like even as it relates to the limit of the liability. I don't, from his take, probably mine too, is it's not that it's not expensive, it's that some folks are not insured at all, and that's how they're able to operate at such lower costs and able to to steal freight away that is literally below operating costs. And so that's why nobody's making any money right now. So I guess I don't disagree with you, but I don't know if that gets to the solve of, I guess, so that's one part of it. But how do you solve the issue about the folks that are not operating with insurance and don't intend to?
Yeah, I think I would say it's likely a very, very small group of people that don't have any insurance. Like most truckers and the technologies that vet you coming into work for a shipper, like a highway or a Cariform and all the different vetting softwares, they can usually give you pretty good accuracy of like, do you have insurance right now on this asset? I do think that some truckers are able to operate under the operating costs because they've already paid their trucks off. So like there's a difference in like a big mega fleet that's buying new equipment, having to pay that equipment versus someone who runs a 15-year-old truck or 10-year-old truck they paid off a couple years ago. But I would say that the minimum insurance is one of these issues that causes both the ATA and OIDA to agree together, which is to say they don't want these things raised. The last time, and this is the name of the bill, and it's a funny name, it's called the Fair Compensation for Truck Crash Victims Act. It was going to raise the minimum insurance up from the $750 to I think at $1.5 million or something like that. And both sides, both OIDA and ATA, viciously fought that. So what I would say, and again, I love both the organizations, if both of them think it's a bad idea, it's probably not a bad idea. It's probably not a bad idea because it would remove capacity. You could not afford it. And that would ultimately mean that truckers would have to exit the business. And we exit now with the market being as rough as it is. But I think the changes incrementally would fundamentally change the business. I think you need to have better enforcement resources as well. But simply raising insurance and increasing inspections, I think, would make a big difference.
I love it. Hey, I got one more question for you, and then a little bit of a wild card.
Let's do it.
For you. So let's talk about 2026.
Yes.
Just general developments. What are some things that you think we will see 2026 that we should be excited about?
Be excited about. I mean, I think what will at least be possible is more certainty. right? So I think certainty on tariffs, because that'll go to the Supreme Court, certainty on broker liability, that'll be decided by the end of next year. So we have some very clear good things happening. As for like what to look forward to in 2026, everyone says it's the back half of next year we see a freight improvement, and that's been the case for several years now. It's the next year back half that'll be great. So maybe that happens. I do hope that we see this resurgence in enforcement. So I'll use the English language proficiency as an example. ELP was the law in the 1930s. It's not like it's a new law, but now the public seem to be interested in enforcing regulations, and that could be good. I would love to see a focus on mud flaps and tire tread depth and lights and brake lining, but I don't know for sure that'll happen.
Well, there you go. All right, final question. So I'm curious. People are entertained; they're educated by you. Who is kind of lighting you up right now? Either podcasts or something that you're reading that you're excited about that you'd want our audience to know, maybe participate with you.
Man, it's not anything novel. Dan Carlin's Hardcore History. I love his podcast. He's been making it for decades. His deep dives into things like World War I or World War II. Like, you don't know where you're going unless you know where you've been. And so much of the innovation supply chain has is something kind of predicated on military technologies. So I would say, like, I love listening to stuff I've listened to 1,000 times. I'd also say Bluey. My kids, my twins are going to be 3 in about 2 weeks from now. And I will say that the media has given a kind of an unfair expectation of parenthood. Like, I can't be as good as the dad in that program. I'm trying, but like, it's an unrealistic expectation for parents. Bluey, I think.
I will say this: my youngest is 8 years old, and she still watches Bluey. I really appreciate the writing in that show because they always have a little nugget for the adults. Like, they keep like a little adult humor. They put it in there. It's very subtle and very funny. They're like, this just a little something for the parents.
Absolutely.
As they know, we're being forced to watch this as well. So I dig it, and I appreciate the podcast recommendation as well. All right, I think we've graduated from Matthew to Matt. I'm just going to go there.
Let's do it. I'll take it. Thank you, sir.
Listen, I really appreciate you sharing your knowledge. I really just appreciate your passion. I mean, I think that's what most people are, why they gravitate towards you. And if nothing else, when you're in an industry that is tough, that's rewarding, that is never a dull moment, you always need passion. And so I really appreciate you bringing that to this interview and also every day to our industry. So we're gonna wrap it right there, sir. That's gonna do it for us in the hot seat. We will see you next time.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.